Hello, everyone. My name is Katie Jameson. I am the Athlete Program and Sport Development Manager at Field Hockey BC. Thank you for coming to tonight's FHBC Athlete Evaluation Methodology webinar. Behind the scenes, we have Lucas Castro, the Member Services and Communications Coordinator at Field Hockey BC. Please note that this webinar is being recorded, so it will be available to view at a later time if you can't attend the entire thing. As the title of this webinar suggests, we are here tonight to discuss how athletes are evaluated. John Sacre, who you can see as well, our provincial head coach and performance manager, will be taking us through the history of our evaluation process and how it is implemented. Please note that this webinar was originally just for coaches. We have obviously opened it up to the public, but that's sort of a little bit the lens that we're going with here. So just as an FYI. At the end of the presentation, we will also be talking about the upcoming Provincial Performance Talent Identification Programming, specifically about the athlete nomination process that coaches will be very critical in this summer. So please stick around for that. A couple of housekeeping items for tonight. There is a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, so question and answer. If you have any questions throughout, please feel free to pop those in there. We will be pausing at certain times throughout the presentation to answer any relevant questions. We will also have an open question period at the end. In the interest of time, just depending on how things go, we may not be able to get to every question tonight. If that's the case, we'll make note of any questions that were left unanswered, and we will either post answers to outstanding questions on our website or connect with individuals through email or a phone call. To that end, if you have any questions after you leave the webinar, or if you're watching the recording and have any questions, you can always reach any member of staff at any time, work hours permitting. Our contact information is on the Field Hockey BC website under About and Contact Us. Before I pass it over, I do see one hand up. So if you do have your hand up, please feel free to put any concerns or issues, technical issues you might be having in the chat. Otherwise, we will get started. So I'm very pleased to pass it over to John Sacre.
Thank you, Katie. Well, good evening, everybody. So just to open up, my name is John Sacre, and I'm the FHBC Provincial Coach and Program Manager. In opening, we'd like to thank all of you for attending tonight's presentation and wanting to learn more about our story and how we are developing a closer alignment with the PSO, NSO, and gold medal profile. As a result of this work, I was asked to present our model to the Canadian Sports Institute Powering Podiums Conference. It's been interesting since that time. Other sports have reached out to us, such as Rugby BC, and they are interested in this, and now they are starting to use this methodology as well. So as Katie mentions, tonight's presentation is really for the coaches that have joined us tonight and how FHBC and FHC are using this model. In turn, as coaches with your clubs, it might be an opportunity to think a little bit about, is this something that when you evaluate your own athletes and teams, is this something that you might want to start to utilize and sort of maybe customize to meet your own needs? So just to sort of get us warmed up and for something for everyone to start to think about as we go along in this presentation, we're going to ask you, particularly the coaches, 4 questions, and it's okay, it's not a test, and we're not going to ask you to hand in your answers, but just keep the answers to yourself, but just put some little bit of thought about this. So number 1, currently in your clubs, do you have a process to evaluate your athletes? And number 2, if you do, what's the scale you use to measure them? Number 3, how many KPIs, key performance indicators, do you have? And if you have key performance indicators, it'd be interesting to see how many you can list out. What are they? And the last question is, do you have established metrics as well? So as I say, we're not going to collect the answers, but we just want to start to get people thinking a little bit about these types of things as we start to cover off some of these items in the presentation. The real point here is, in my perspective, there's no right or wrong There's many different ways that this can be done. The key is we want to develop a system that has alignment. So just to go over a little bit of background, well, what is a GMP? There might be people that aren't clear on what GMP is, meaning gold medal profile. And this is the definition taken from the 2019 Canadian High Performance Sports Strategy. The gold medal profile is a collection of skills and attributes that underpin the performance of an athlete capable of stepping into the Olympic, Paralympics, or Senior World Championship podium. The GMP is based on validated metrics with clear benchmarks for each of the skills and attributes scaled accordingly to the stage the athlete is along the podium pathway. It's important to note that OTP, for an example, on the podium, all sports have a GMP model. Actually, if you go online and you search GMP sports or particular sports, you'll see a whole bunch of other sports that have the GMP model. But basically, what this is a tool that can be used to identify the gaps in the players and teams' performances by targeting identified athletes through performance profiling. So last year, a little bit of background, 2019-20, which seems a long time ago with COVID, of course, we had a workshop with the key stakeholders. There was FHBC, FHC, and Canadian Sports Institute. David Hill from Canadian Sports Institute kindly facilitated the session. And during that afternoon in the workshop, we wanted to establish 3 imperatives. First one being trust. Well, the people there that you can see on the screen, we already had a positive working history, recognizing that we all wanted the same outcome, and that was to get alignment. Next piece was to get clarification on purpose. So we wanted to start to explore what was the role of the PSO and the Next Gen program in supporting the national senior team. So for example, some of the questions that was posed to Paul or the questions is for the national team, how many athletes and when, and what type of athletes are you going to need? So basically, what this was about was establishing a succession plan for the national team. Case point with the men's program, we're going to go through the Olympics, and then right after that, there's probably going to be some retirements. So the real question is how many athletes are ready to move into those spots, what positions, and what kind of profile is going to be needed to fill those gaps. The last piece was alignment of systems. So what we wanted to establish was we wanted to be on the same language. We wanted to be able to talk apples to apples. So a bit of the brief background. FHC starting point, we had, as you can see at the top here, we had established 8 KPIs going from 1 to 5, 5 being an entry point. Well, this is what we think an exceptional next-gen athlete would be. But as you can see, when you get to the OTP level, and I've had the privilege of sitting in on the podium review meetings, you need to get into a pretty high level of specifics. And at this time, Paul had 39 KPIs ranging from 1 hypothetical international athletes to 5 to what a world-class athlete looks like. So the real question is, there was a big gap going from a provincial team right up to a senior international. So what does entry look like? What does alignment look like? And it really came down to is how are we going to align and connect all the pipes together, being such a big gap? So what we felt was the key was the Next Gen program, which actually filled the gap between the 2 programs. If we could connect all 3 pathways and establish alignment, we could then have a shared framework. We'd be looking at the same scale, we would be looking at the same KPIs and metrics, and even more importantly, we could start to explore and identify well, what the key entry-level percentages to the pathway might look like. So this is quite a important slide. For me, this is the key to the whole thing, and there's lots here. So just bear with me and we'll go through it a little bit more in detail. But what it demonstrates is it's a sample of our new 1 to 9 performance matrix. This is now provides and shows us a deeper dive and clear separation between the various levels. And now we're looking at the execution under what kind of competition level and what type of level of pressure they're performing at. So I just want to go over maybe starting from the bottom here. And what we've done is we've broken it out by execution along this axis and competition level. So along the bottom, we're looking at limited to advanced, and the competition level is, for me, I think the most improved area that we've been looking at. So just going through these, we're looking at domestic competition. It's limited pressure in our environment in Canada. That's including the national championships, club championships, anything domestically in Canada, we're viewing at that level. It's limited pressure. When you move out to the international level, and for those national team players and experienced national team coaches and assistant coaches and people that have traveled abroad, they'll start to understand where we're going with this. So it's a big jump going from domestic competition up to the U21 international competition. There we deem that level as moderate pressure. And that's typically the next gen pathway layer, if you will. And even then, when you move from the U21 up to the senior international level, that's high pressure. That's the national team level. And it's almost like when you're driving a car. All of a sudden you get used. When we first learned to drive a car, we're very focused on what we're doing. But then over the years, we get pretty complacent on how we're driving and we feel pretty comfortable. But if I was to take you in that environment and put you into a Formula One race car and all of a sudden have you traveling 200 miles an hour with other race cars there, it's a big jump. And such is it with field hockey. I know my own experience going from provincial up to U21 international, up to the senior national, there was a big jump. And I think it's important to identify our current environment. So going through this a little bit, pardon me, we'll come to that. You can see the scale that we've come up with. So 1 being entry-level provincial, up to 9 world-class. And that's the real question. And when we meet with OTP and Canadian Sports Institute, the question is, where is the athlete along the pathway to being world-class? In fact, that's some of the questions that asked of the national team coaches is, how many actual world-class athletes do you have? Because that's the business at high performance. It's about getting medals and going onto the podium. So we broke it down into these 9 categories. And why 9? Because if you go to 10, most people end up putting 5. So we said, okay, 1 to 9. 1 is the entry-level provincial program. 2, developing provincial athlete. 3, good provincial. And that's at the domestic level. When you move into the U21 international level, 4, that's entry level for next gen. 5, average junior international. 6, good junior. And you can see where this is going. 7, developing international. 8, good international. And finally, 9, world class. So what we've also layered on here is actually some of the definitions of the metrics of what we're looking at. So a 1, and it's the language that's important here. A 1 is if you're limited set of skills, but you're sporadic under limited pressure. 2, you're limited set of skills, moderate execution under limited pressure. And 3, limited set of skills, reliable. So what it really comes down to when we're looking at athletes, are they sporadic with their skills? And I'll go through the KPIs in a minute. Are they moderate or are they reliable? Now, some coaches may ask, well, I need a little bit better definition of reliable. Well, I think most experienced coaches, reliable, and even club coaches, when it really comes down to it, when you have an important game, whether it be Division 3, it could be Prem, it could be all kinds of situations. If you really have a situation where you need to win that game, you kind of have an intuitive sense of, okay, these are my dependable players for multiple reasons. And I think that's the thing that Field Hockey Canada is interested in, is what are the reliable provincial players that are ready to move up into the next gen level. So moving on to the U21, they want to see when your entry level significant, sporadic, because it's a big jump going from provincial up to your first international. You can ask the players that maybe for the first time with the women's program that went down to the States, all of a sudden we're pretty good here, but when you move into that arena, it is quite a jump. Level 5, significant, reliable. 6, are you advanced, reliable? So again, the national team are saying, okay, they'll be turning to the next gen coaches and saying, who has an advanced set of skills that are reliable under U21 moderate pressure? Same thing with 7, significant perfect, 8, advanced appropriate, and world-class advanced set of skills, perfect choice and execution. So for me, this is kind of the real cornerstone of where we're starting to go. And Katie, maybe I think I'm going to continue on talk about the KPIs, but this might be an opportunity. If there's any questions, we'll be happy to take a quick break here and answer a few.
There are no questions at this time. So John, why don't you move on to the next slide? If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A box and we can answer them. Perhaps if anyone has any questions sort of on this slide, after the next 2 might be a good break, but none for now.
Sure. I don't know if that's because I'm doing a good job and it's being explained, or it's too confusing.
Oh,
Anyway.
actually, sorry, John, there is one question.
Okay.
So should number 8 be perfect versus appropriate?
You know what? That's a good question. I'll have to go back and we can review that. Thank you for pointing that out. And
then one other question, curious if the rating is shared with the players or kept for coaches' eyes only, question mark?
No, the intention is to share this with the athletes. I have in Field Hockey Canada too, we need to work with Field Hockey Canada collectively because this is just not our model or our documents. I'll work with Field Hockey Canada and we'll have to figure out the rollout, but it's pretty open and transparent as far as I can see. There's nothing really too concerned here, but just out of professional courtesy, we need to share this with Field Hockey Canada and when we release it.
I think the just on that last question, you may also have meant like if an individual player's report card is shared.
Right.
Just maybe different interpretations.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yes. Moving forward, the intention is to share the evaluations with the athletes. We're working with software Skill Sharks. It has that capability where we can share that information. One of the concerns we have, though, is that might get out into social media. And I know there's been some inquiries about getting all the teams' evaluations, like the clubs and things like that. But we're going to look into that. But the concern I have as a coach is our athletes are all minors. So if we do send out the evaluations, just like report cards go to students, it'll go to that individual only. Those specifics will not be shared with anyone else at this time until we work out some of these things. And not only that, it can be pretty embarrassing for an athlete should they get necessarily a poor score. So we're very concerned about the information and how it's passed on. And our biggest concern is protecting the athlete's information. As you say, they all are minors.
Okay, thank you. And then one last question has Field Hockey Canada had input into this matrix, and is it the same nationwide or only in BC?
Yes, it was. As I say, we go back to the original slide. This was developed at the time with Paul Bundy, who was the national team coach. Hugh was the men's next gen manager director. Patrick was also there, and myself. So that was the real starting point. And yes, this is a combined document. It's being currently reviewed by the current national team staff. I was just talking to Patrick and Andrew. They reviewed it and talking with Adam as well. For all intents and purposes, they saw this. They're pretty comfortable. They said, wow, a lot of work has gone in here. So at this time, they don't see any changes. However, such as in sport, I would anticipate some changes as each coach comes in and maybe they're looking for a few different things. And I'll touch base and I have an example of that a little bit later. So it is a dynamic working partnership with Field Hockey Canada. And as far as I know, they plan on using this across the country, which ideally would be a bit of the vision. So for example, if we make this a standardized evaluation process for all athletes in the country, for myself, I think it'd be fantastic where we could get some evaluators all trained. And like when I've worked in the past with provincial coaches from Alberta and Ontario, you get the calibration correct. And so, for example, I should be able to go to Ontario and watch an Ontario training session and evaluate, and we can get Ontario or Alberta coaches coming here. So it would be a nice way to standardize the evaluation process across the country, both male and female as well.
Sounds great. No other questions at this time.
All right. Thank you very much. So I put this slide in just sort of to give you the big picture here. And these are examples now where we're going to dive into the KPIs, key performance indicators, and scoring for the field players. So I just want to orientate you along the top here. So again, this is the competition level. So the blue represents provincial or domestic. These are skills and KPIs executed under limited pressure. So this is our pathway domestically. When players move in to the U21, execution under moderate, and senior, this is execution under high pressure. So we'll focus in, based on the audience today, on the provincial. The performance scales are below provincial, entry-level provincial, developing provincial, and good provincial. The execution metrics, again, going back to the block previous screen, limited set of skills seldom executes, 0 points. Sporadic execution, 1 point. Moderate execution, 2 points. And reliable execution, 3 points. Now, the KPIs. When I asked a lot of you to go back at the beginning to establish how many KPIs there are, as you can see in the example earlier, you can go from 3 right up to the national team had 39. So what we ended up doing was we landed on these 12. And again, people have different views and there's different ways of looking at it. And again, these may change. But for now, the feeling was on the field players, we wanted to look at their passing ability. We wanted to look at their receiving ability, tactical defense, tactical offense. What kind of commitments do the athletes have? That's a big one. And I'm sure you as club coaches too, you often have issues with commitments. What kind of potential do they have? Attacking penalty corners, specific skills. If some of them are drag flickers, first runners, there's all kinds of different specialties play skills that we're looking for. Defensive penalty corners. And this one's an important one, daily training environment and competition. And there is a difference between the two, and I'll just take a pause here. You can have athletes that are very good at training and doing drills and things like that. But the question is, this is all about performance. Are you able to take what you do in practice, execute it in a daily competitive environment, on the day, under pressure, when fatigued? That's what this is all about at the high performance level. So you may score well in a daily training environment at training, but it doesn't mean in competition that'll transfer over. And yet I've seen the opposite. And these are the real gems out there. You may have kids that kind of struggle in training and things, but those are the gamers. Those are the kids and athletes that show up on the game and they perform time and time again. So it's important to recognize the two. On the physiology side at the bottom here, currently the endurance yo-yo test and the acceleration 40-meter sprint test. Now, those will probably be changed, and I'll show you an example in talking to the current IST lead for Field Hockey Canada, and I'll come to that part a little bit later. So those are the 12 KPIs that Field Hockey Canada is looking for, and in alignment now, that's what we're starting to look for as well. Now, what about the goalies? Well, we've also put one together for the goalies. And again, different people have different expertise on this. But for now, basically, same parameters along the top. But the KPIs are, how are they on their initial shot? Are they agile? How are they with their hands? How are they with their stick? Can they move their feet? It's particularly, actually, this one's good for field players as well. But decision making. How are they with verbal direction? And then the rest are the same pretty well as the field players: commitment, potential, how are they at practice, but more importantly, how are they in competition, endurance yo-yo test, and accelerator 40 meters. Now for me, this one's been interesting over the years I've been involved with the national team. Are these the best tests for goalies? I think we need to evaluate that and see if we can't come up with something. And I'd like to be working with Field Hockey Canada on that, because I know with the new IST lead, they're also looking at that. So that's the basically KPIs and scoring for the keepers. So this was the example I keep alerting to, or keep mentioning. This is the yo-yo standards that we put together at the time. And this is just an example of how you're rewarded if you go deeper into the test and you keep going. You're rewarded for your fitness level, and thus it improves your score. So for example, in the past, if you did a yo-yo test, it's sort of, well, this was the standard, and a lot of athletes would maybe at the end of it just sort of say, okay, good, I've met the standard. But there are those that like kept pushing. And we wanted to find a creative way to reward those athletes that would go above and beyond what the minimum was. And so we developed, for example, on this side here, a point system for the deeper you go into the yo-yo test, you would get rewarded and have more value. So if the entry level for Provincial was 18.1 to 18.7, you get a single point. But there are those players out there, we have some phenomenal athletes. If they went up to the 18.8 up to the 20.5, they get a 3, or even the 20.6, 21.7, 5. You might even have some really young athletes that can run at a world-class level. So we thought it was important to recognize those athletes that are actually pushing themselves and are fitter as well. So I just wanted to touch base that we recognize that there are different fitness tests, and with it, we're going to be asking for, well, what is the standard? Should we change the yo-yo test? And it's always, yo-yo tests and fitness tests are always a little controversial. Once we get that information, the plan is not to just sort of say, okay, and by the way, at the last minute, this is what we're doing. As soon as we find out and we start to implement this, we're going to give as much advanced notice on what that looks like in scales and structure as possible. But that's an example of how things can change in the last year, knowing that we're having a new coaching staff coming into Field Hockey Canada. So moving forward, this is now an example of how you can see how we've established the common KPIs. We got the 12 of them. We've also established our scaling 1 to 9 for both the PSO and NSO organization. So here now, FHBC, we have 12 KPIs, the same one as the next gen, the same 12 KPIs. We have the same scale, 1 to 9, and the next gen, 1 to 9. So this means now we can start to communicate. And so when we're having our camps, for example, when we're doing our trials, and we've always invited Field Hockey Canada, and we will continue to have them being invited anytime we have a training camp or evaluations or selections are perfectly welcome to come. We can start to evaluate together. And so we're now beginning to talk the same language, which is very important. I won't comment on the next gen and the national team KPIs. That's something for Field Hockey Canada to work through, and I'm sure they are at this point in time. But this, for our audience and for our needs at the provincial level, is very important. So overall, we can now have a better picture of where the athletes are in their development, remembering it's from 1 to 9. As you can see, this now provides a GMP ranking, or a gold medal profile ranking. From this, it can be used to see where the athletes fits on the performance scale. So I'm just going to go through this and I'll show you the performance scale in a second. So this would be sort of a report card, remembering that we're at the provincial level, limited pressure in domestic competition. So it's a 0, 1, 2, or 3. So in this particular report, it's important to note down here at the bottom that because of COVID, Field Hockey BC could not program any competitions, which was incredibly disappointing. If you remember, we were all getting ready to go. I actually posted an open expression of interest, which was great. And thank you for everyone that submitted their expression of interest. I think we had around 27 to 30 people that were interested in coaching our provincial team. So that's fantastic. But because we couldn't do any competition, the number of KPIs that we had when we could do our evaluations, and KJ has a slide and will kind of outline a little bit of that later. But we had to reduce the number of KPIs to the ones listed above based on the regional training back in 2019 and 20. So everyone's aware, like we've all gone through this COVID. It's been very difficult. It seems every time we start to ramp up some of our program, we've had to shut it down. And I can appreciate the clubs. They've gone through the same thing, and congratulations for the clubs. And we thank you for at least mobilizing and trying to keep your club players going. And so thank you very much for that. So in this case here, just an example, the passing, this athlete, basically the selectors felt that they were reliable on that. On receiving, however, they were sporadic. Defensively, a 1, offensively a 2. They were moderate. Commitment, moderate. Potential, moderate. However, in the daily training environment, they were a 3. They were very reliable. And on the yo-yo, obviously they did very well in their yo-yo score. So we gave them the appropriate full marks for 3. So you take the total score, in this case it's 17. You look at the maximum points, in this case it's 8 KPIs times 9 points, that's world-class level, so it's apples to apples, 72. And you take that, and that gives you a GMP ranking of 24. So the question is now, how do you take that and utilize it? So this is a bit busy, so I'll just walk you through this a little bit here. So when you get a GMP ranking, you're looking at the performance scale. So just try to stay focused in the middle column here. So this is entry-level provincial athlete, developing provincial athlete, good provincial athlete. Again, going back to that big block of scores from 1 to 9, it's the same language here. And that's at the provincial level here. The next gen, entry level, average, good, developing, right up to world class. So you can see the components here. And this is the new piece here now. So this is where we have our GMP ranking and carding level. So we take a look at that GMP ranking and where does it fit along that scale? So if you're between 18 and 21%, you're at the entry level provincial level. Between 22 and 25, you're developing. 26 to 32, you're in our top elite program or good provincial athlete. And again, working with you at the time, the feeling was when an athlete gets in around the 32, 33 percentage, that's the piece, and that's the ones that they're starting to say, hey, we need to learn a little bit more about that. That's the entry level for next gen. So you have an entry level for provincial, an entry level for next gen, and I need to get this updated from Field Hockey Canada once the national team coaches have had a chance to get familiar with everybody on what the entry level maybe is for the senior development or for the senior national team. We've also aligned it with the Canadian Sports Institute provincial carding. We aligned it, in fact, that feeling is right now 18 to 21, no carding, but our PD2s is in this range, our PD1s in this range. And if you become an athlete with the Canadian Next Gen program, then we're going to be looking at carding you as a Canadian development card. But it's important to note as we've gone through this, and we haven't even gone through this for a full provincial cycle, the GMP ranking percentages are subject to change and review. And again, working with Field Hockey Canada, we're going to have to maybe play a little bit with this, working with the new national team coaches and next gen managers and coaches as well, even at the provincial level. So I just wanted to flag that because maybe even the key performance indicators change as well. So how does this all come from FHBC's perspective? And this is always the question that gets asked. Well, how do we develop and put our teams together? Well, with this tool, the first step is we're going to conduct the athlete evaluations. So we're planning on having some evaluation camps, but typically, as I say, back in March, we were planning to do all our evaluation camps for all the age brackets and have our selectors there and do the evaluations. And once we've done the evaluations, we then rank them by ability. That's your GMP score. So what could happen is you could get maybe the top 20 athletes all very close to 27, 28, or maybe 30. A block of athletes, there might be 15, 20 of those athletes. They're all ranked by ability. So when that typically sort of happens, we just also don't want to make sure that they're all forwards because we need a balanced team. So we take a look at all those athletes because they're ranked by ability first. We then look at them by position, as you say, because we want to have a balanced team. In the past, some of you might have had teams where you have too many defenders and you can't score goals. Or I had teams where they're all forwards and we can't get the ball out of the backfield. So balancing it out by position is important as well. However, you might have 7 or 8 forwards that are all equal across the board. And that's when we have to drill down. And this is the artistry that the coaches look at. And each coach is different, but you might have to look at the specifics of what each athlete has. A lot of times coaches may just come down to say, you know what, they're all equal, but I'm going to take this athlete because they have the fittest and or they're the fastest athlete out there because I'm going to do a high press. Maybe some coaches look at the tactical side of things. Different coaches have different ways of building their teams. And I think that's the fun part about coaching is when I plan on meeting with the coaches before we go into the provincial program, I want to lay out with them what's their vision, how do they want to see their team play? Because at the end of the day, and I hope I don't offend anybody, it's about beating the opposition. So you better have a bit of a game plan on what your winning style of play looks like. And that's how you need to build your team out. So at the end of the day, when we've gone through all those filters, you come up with the final 16. And so when I meet with the coaches, I ask them typically, what are you looking for? And some say, I need 5 strikers. I want to have 6 midfielders, 4 backs, and 1 goalkeeper. A lot of feelings today of modern hockey is you have to be able to play one more position. So midfielders, a lot of them can play multiple positions. They can drop back or they can move up. So I just want to emphasize, I think a lot of times people think, well, I'm in the top 16. Well, not only do you have to make the top 16, you have to be the top 5 if you want to be a striker. So it really narrows things down. And I was fortunate enough to have, when I was coming through as a young athlete, a German coach, and his advice to me is always try to get yourself in the top 8. Don't just try to barely make the team. You have to train harder and be fitter than anyone else. So there's no hesitation on what they're going to do when they select you. So that's my advice is you need to be confident in your abilities, but you got to say to yourself, I need to be in the top 5 in the strikers, 6 midfielders, 4 backs, because it's not just about making the top 16. So I just want to go over sort of a summary on the GMP and what we've done. Again, I just want to note in this first area here that the GMP is subject to change as we continue to work with Field Hockey Canada and align this model. Even the game changes and there could be rule changes and who knows, but it's very dynamic at the top elite level, as you know. If everyone's watched field hockey at the top level, even in the last 2-3 years, everything seems to change pretty quickly. But what's really nice now is we have nice collaboration. We're continuing to work with the PSOs, NSOs, and now through this presentation, we would really like to work with the club coaches and the executives, and I'd be happy to sit down with their executives, and if they'd like to look at this and how we can maybe adapt it to some of your clubs, I'd be more than happy to meet with you and we can take a look at this. The nice thing is we're building trust. We're clarifying the purpose of what we're trying to do at a big picture, and even more importantly, alignment of the systems. To present, we now have an improved alignment with Field Hockey Canada and with our organization. I believe Ontario and Alberta and the other provinces will be coming along as well. We have improved consistency with the Field Hockey Canada and ourselves on the targeted athletes, and we're being able to make better informed decisions on selections as a result of collecting some data as opposed to just sitting there and kind of pointing at athletes. Some of the challenges, though, unique to Field Hockey BC is implementation at the PSO level. Now for us, we're very, very fortunate, but we have to evaluate approximately 400 to 500 athletes. So Calibration in education for coaches and selectors on this new methodology is important. Also, collecting the data and managing the data. As I say, we currently have a software package that I've been working with the president, and we've actually developed this, and he's helped me put a module together specifically for our KPIs, Skill Sharks, and they've been very good, and it's a tool that we've used to collect the information, and at another time, or if a club's interested, I'll be happy to share that with you. But as you can see, we have challenges, collaborations, present where we are, and the challenges. So I just wanted to include this one as we start to wrap up a little bit on this one. I wanted to bring to your attention the FHBC Provincial Pathway Model. So this model was developed through the leadership of Jennifer Taylor and her working group. We've made some changes to Field Hockey BC programming. And again, there's quite a lot on the slide here, so I'll just do a quick orientation for you. Down here, we're looking at development programs. Those are the high schools, athlete school academies, clubs, and our FHBC technical development program. Again, this is the performance pathway. At the provincial level, these are the provincial teams, U16 provincial team, U18 provincial team, and previously it was the U23 provincial team, but that might change and it might become a U21 provincial team. So I know the provinces are working with Field Hockey Canada, so stay tuned with that. And I'm sure some of the older players will be wondering, well, what's going to happen if we're in that gap that are 21 to 23, and we're working with Field Hockey Canada on that to get that resolved as well. But I just wanted to highlight, this is the new program that's been developed. This is for once we've gone through the provincial cycle and we've had our provincial team training and we've actually gone to the competition. At the end of the national championships, all the coaches are going to be asked to do their GMP ranking on how the athletes did. And from that, we're going to be taking, as I explained on the GPM range, we're going to be looking at helping out and working with the elite program athletes. And these are the ones that typically from 26% to 32%. Now, this isn't a new idea. We've actually managed to talk to other sports. For example, basketball's BC does something like this, and they work collaboratively with Field Hockey Canada on this. But it's really to get those athletes that are very close to that window, maybe a year or two away. It doesn't mean that the athletes in this area aren't elite athletes. It means maybe they're just a little bit further away in their pathway moving into the next gen program. In some cases, they might be 5 to 8 years away, which is fine. That means that their projection's going in the right direction. But this one is really for those top athletes, as I say, that are maybe a year or two away. From there, when you leave this program, and there might even go from national championships be identified in this level, you might go right into the next gen level. Or in some cases, you might be identified as a provincial athlete, and we might have someone from, who knows, overseas or all kinds of different reasons. You might get an athlete that plays at the nationals, they go right to the national team. But looking over here, competition opportunities, I won't go through this, but take your time and we can send this out. It's on our website. The Olympic Games, World Cup, Commonwealth Games, U21s, we have tours, etc. National championship opportunities, U15s, U18s. I have to update this a little bit. This is an important one, specifically for the female side. We want to recognize youth sports, and there's some great discussions with Field Hockey Canada, the provinces, and in really bolstering up the youth sports, because that's a big module that needs to be even more developed. We also have the domestic competitions as well. These are the carding cycles that you have. And again, these are the organizations. And just to the left here, these are the stages of the long-term athlete development. So I won't go into too much detail, but I just wanted to flag that to you. So I'm just going to wrap up, and then we'll ask a few more questions, and then we'll go on to KJ's part of the presentation. But for those of you that have some more detailed questions, I want to bring your direction, on our website, there was the new Provincial Athlete Pathway Review Project. And the final report is actually on the website. And this was prepared back in August of 2020 for the Field Hockey BC Board of Directors. It's a 30-page report. It's very thorough. And if you go into the FHBC homepage, you'll see it there. If you go under players and then Provincial Athlete Pathway Review Project, you'll see if you scroll down, there's the final report. You can access the final report here. If you click on it, it comes up. It's also, I think, really key to see the process and all the various check-ins that the committee had with the various stakeholders and the clubs. As you can see here, some of these, you can see there was the project review, there was the club feedback questionnaire that went out to all the clubs and we received that information. We did a status update webinar with all the clubs. We did the pathway review project communication. We had a second status meeting webinar with the clubs. We had a final report and even the pathway invitation for membership engagement. So it was quite a thorough process that was done, and I encourage you to please go onto the website, you download the report, and it's very thorough, and it might answer a lot of the questions that you might have in there. So I've talked for a little while here, so Kate, maybe we'll stop just before you start, and I'll be happy to take on any questions at this time.
So we do have some questions so far. This one's from a little ways back, but does the age of a player make a difference at all going from provincial to next gen, et cetera?
That's a next gen question, but I think if you meet the profile and you can meet the standards, I don't see why you can't take a younger player. That's a question that unfortunately, or fortunately or unfortunately, with the national championships, there are age brackets. You have the U16, U18. But international, when I look at rosters of other teams, you could have an 18-year-old kid playing on the senior national team. So at the international level, there is no restriction for the national senior teams.
Okay, and then next question is, the ranking GMP system is logical, but how are you going to ensure consistency with how each evaluator ranks an athlete? With the categories being fairly broad, for example, tactical offense, and the scale being limited, example 0 to 3, how do you ensure that two independent evaluators come up with a similar ranking for any given athlete? Further to this, how can club coaches be educated on this evaluation so they can better prepare athletes and help manage expectations going into selections?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's one of the challenges. So I'm going to call that's where we have to calibrate coaches. When we're heading into this, we're going to be opening it up for expression of interest for people that would be interested in selectors. But one of the things with this review project, we've developed some terms of reference. And so we're going to be looking for experienced coaches that probably have coached at the top provincial level, national team level, people that have been at the international scene. So we want to establish a very high level of evaluators. And from there, intuitively and through experience, when I've talked to other previous national team coaches on this and provincial coaches, they've pretty well have a really good understanding of what those definitions are. I mean, an example would be, are they consistent with their hitting and trapping? Most actually people, when they're watching, it is challenging. But the idea is to start to get the calibration, all of us on the same page. And that will be a challenge, and it's recognized. My role is to ensure that there's no bias. That's the key thing. You might have some different calibrations, but that's why we have maybe up to 5 selectors. So it'll be a pretty good understanding of where everything is at.
Sounds good. So the next question, sorry, 1 second. So someone else has asked, I think I understand the question, the expectations of a U16 provincial athlete would be very different from a U23 provincial athlete, wouldn't they? So how would the scale work at the bottom end?
Well, I think the expectations of a U16 players playing in the national championships, for example, would be, are they consistent playing within that? Are they a 3? Are they reliable playing in the U16 tournament? We're not comparing them at this point against a U18. That U16 player would be playing with players at their own level, even at the competition level. So it is a little bit apples to apples. However, that's a question for Field Hockey Canada. How would you gauge a U16 player against a U18? Well, one of the ways is that's happened in the past is there's been U16 players that get invited to U21 camps. And if that player can hold their own, can handle the pace and the physical side of it, then there's no reason why you can't score them. So it's just a question of how you want to put the bandwidths together. For us, it's pretty simple. We have the different categories, U16, U18, U21. So we'll keep players in that bandwidth.
So how do you evaluate a player performance under pressure? Do you intend to take them to local tournaments, etc.?
Yeah. So that's something that's under review. It'd be ideal to have more competition. For us, we're pretty limited as far as getting premium turf time to have our trials, but that's why we have our selection process, and we try to recreate that environment at our training camps. So for example, this year, we're looking to do drill components in the morning, so the players get a lot of touches. I've been to tournaments where athletes, you may not get a lot of ball in games and things like that. So the idea is we would recreate those type of pressure situations doing drills, and then in the afternoon we would recreate some games, and it might be even small games, could be 3-on-3 or 5-on-5. Stay tuned on that based on COVID, what that might happen. The ultimate is, and that's why we go through the provincial cycle and national championships. That is the premium tournament that we have to truly evaluate players for Field Hockey Canada and us. And that's why it's a joint venture. Those national championships are key to looking at comparing where the athletes are in their development on how they perform at the national championships.
Would you consider some sort of scouting from local leagues?
Yeah, I think the question is, what's the quality of the league? Again, this is a challenge for the coaches. And what's the purpose of the league? So I think if the environment is in a competitive, meaningful nature, then I think it depends too when it fits in within the timelines on the YTP, yearly training plan, and what's the intention of that league and or event. So that's why right now, typically things are camped based, because it's a very full schedule. There's so much going on, which is fantastic. Athletes have a lot of chances to do a lot of things, but if we could figure out a way to get it all fit in, absolutely, we're open to that.
I've been hanging on to this question for a few minutes. I'll answer it myself, actually. So will there be any Field Hockey BC camps in this summer 2021, for provincial U16 talent? The answer is yes. So that's what I will be talking about in a second. So this is possibly a great segue. We will be running camps at the U16, U18, and U21 level. I'm going to leave it actually, no, let's move on to the next section. If anyone has any other questions about what John has been talking about, we will have a final question period in a couple of minutes once I go through my little bit of the presentation. So you're welcome to you're welcome to ask any more questions about the GMP and KPIs and everything like that. But for right now, let's move on, John. All right, so we just wanted to give you an overview of the Field Hockey BC Canadian Sport Institute Targeted Athlete List timeline. Now, this also shows you our plans for a normal provincial cycle, which the top in blue would have been what we were hoping to run this year based on recommendations from the Athlete Pathway Program Review Project, as well as the impacts of the pandemic and what we are running this year. So I will just go through the normal provincial cycle first, just to explain. There's a lot going on this slide. I fully recognize that. So the original plan for this year, as well as the plan for future years, will be an athlete nomination process that would open in January or February. This would be for coaches to nominate athletes to the provincial program identification cycle. So then we will have provincial team trials and selections in March and April. Athletes will be evaluated there, and then top athletes will make our provincial team and training squads. And the training will happen at the end of June. That's the current schedule. Nationals, we presume, will be happening in July. Again, this is sort of what we were anticipating for this year and probably what will happen next year, but please note it's a bit subject to change for future years. So the Nationals will happen in July. Immediately after Nationals, John mentioned this before, athletes are again evaluated at Nationals. And this is what helps inform our CSI targeted athlete list. So in July and August, those evaluations are completed and reviewed. Now, what we also want to emphasize here is that the CSI targeted athlete list, which I think is new to a lot of people in our community, at least hearing about it is, it's been around for a very, very long time, but it's making a bigger impact on our community now. So just for everyone's knowledge, that in September of each year, Field Hockey BC's programs are submitted to CSI, Canadian Sport Institute, for the following year. So those are reviewed by CSI. And then in October is when we actually submit that targeted athlete list that we would have prepared in July or August. And then finally, that targeted athlete list for the following year, that is reviewed in about November, and that's when it actually gets published. So for both future years and for this year, even though evaluations take place in the summer, that official list doesn't get presented until November. So just going over the COVID-19 impacts and what's happening this year. So again, we were delayed. We really wanted to hold camps. We really wanted to have nationals, but we really wanted to hold camps back in March. We were unable to. We didn't think it was fair to run anything when we wouldn't be able to have a valuable evaluation. So back in March, we were still restricted. I mean, we're still restricted to 3-meter distancing and no games. We've now moved our U16, U18, and U21 camps to the summer, where we hope that we will actually be able to do some small scrimmages. Again, John mentioned whether that might be 3-on-3, 4-on-4, or hopefully a full 11-a-side game. So moving through sort of expectations again for this summer, the athlete nomination form submission that coaches will need to complete, and I'll talk about a bit in the next slide, that process is opening next week and is on until June. And then the camps are happening in July and August. And then after that, again, Field Hockey BC will be evaluating and scoring athletes. That information this year will be submitted to Field Hockey Canada, and they will then take that information and use it to inform who they want to invite to their own talent identification camps. And then from there, it's the same process for when we submit information to Canadian Sport Institute. All right, so I'll move on to the next slide, where this is talking about what's happening this summer and the athlete nomination process. So please note, I know there are a lot of athletes and parents on this call, and for coaches too. Next week, next Tuesday, we'll be sending out the full information package of when exactly camps are, as well as full information on what the athlete nomination looks like, what athletes can expect at camps, as well as with registration. So tonight, we're not sharing all of that information. It's coming next week though. We're just a few days away, so please stay tuned for that. It'll come through one of our newsletters, as well as we put on social media and on our website. So again, going back to the athlete nomination process, this is really critical for coaches. So having this captive audience tonight, I really wanted to make sure we get this message across. So the process itself is an athlete nomination form must be submitted it can be submitted by any athlete's coach. So that can be an academy coach, a club coach, a Field Hockey BC program coach, or a high school coach if any high school programs were allowed to go on this year. From there, that is a Google form that each coach will fill out for each athlete. There's 5 or 6 questions where you rank your athletes, and you're given a little space to explain sort of what the X factor is about each athlete. From there, nominated athletes will then receive an invitation from Field Hockey BC staff to actually register for the ID camps. So if you do not receive a nomination, you won't be able to register. Please note that the registration information, may not be sent to you directly after your coach nominates you, but there's a window of time, as you can see below, for when you can register. Also note that information is probably coming from my email, katie@fieldhockeybritishcolumbia.com. It often goes to junk folders, so please pay attention to your junk folder. So then once the nominated athletes are invited to register, then they will have time to register. As you can see at the bottom of this slide, they'll have until June 14th to register. And then before the camps happen in July and August, they will receive full information about the ID camp. Okay, so I've been talking a lot. Just to highlight again those key dates for anyone that's on the phone that can't see this slide, May 19th is when the athlete nomination window opens for coaches to nominate athletes. And then that closes on June 2nd. And then athletes will have until June 14th to register. And I'm going to flip over there. We're gonna open it up again for any questions. I know I went through that kind of quickly. So there are no academy or high school programs this year. So how would someone get nominated? I imagine you still have, you're still in contact with that coach, or basically any coach can nominate you. We understand that programs haven't been able to happen this year as normal. So if they need to base their nomination on you on a previous season, we fully understand that in this year. All right, I will leave it open for any other questions.
KJ, I just have a comment, if I may.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So because this is a new process, we felt it was important to get the club coaches involved. That's why through our review, the feeling was the best ways to get a coach nomination. And that's been actually modeled with other sports. So then again, this isn't a new idea. But I think it's important just to remind ourselves that as coaches, we have a bit of a responsibility that when you're nominating an athlete, one, as a club coach, we're going to be looking to you to help prepare that athlete. So when they come into an evaluation camp, they're fit, they're ready to go, and they're going to do everything they can to do their best performance. So we want to be sort of this year monitoring this a little bit, because it can be quite a difficult situation for a young athlete that's not prepared going into an evaluation camp. And we need to be a bit aware of that. I guess what we're trying to avoid is, a coach sending in 30, 40 kids because, oh, it's a good experience, but you're not really, helping the athlete, because it could be a very frustrating situation if they never gone through this. So just think a little bit about that. And this is sort of the responsibility of a coach, that you're really truly putting athletes forward that you feel have a pretty good opportunity to have some success. And at the end of it, regardless of how they do, it's a positive experience, because the last thing we want to do is throw an athlete in that thinks they want to be in a high performance environment. Maybe they try it, but I'm just flagging that for the coaches to be aware and make sure you also prepare the athlete on what to maybe expect as well.
So building on that, there's a few questions that have come in, but this is specifically related. It seems this whole process will work better if club coaches are aligned with provincial coaches. How does Field Hockey BC anticipate helping to educate coaches in this system? Sort of answered that already, but if you can go into it again, that would be great.
Yeah. as we go through this, I think one of the first steps that needs to happen, and this has been a great year for alignment on coach education. I think that's the first starting point, that Field Hockey Canada has done a great job on reevaluating the program and laying out a pretty nice pathway for coaches, going right from community coach to the various pathways. So that's the first step, that we'd like to see educated coaches. As we go through this process, we'll be happy to share the information as we start to maybe work with the various clubs. We'll start to calibrate it. So the first opportunity is we need to get out there and start playing again. But I think as we go through, the clubs need to sit down, and I guess the first question is this something that they'd be interested as well? So I'm not sure if that's a clear answer or not, but yes, I'm willing to work with the club coaches, but we need to go through this, I think, through one cycle with the provincial level to get lessons learned, and with Field Hockey Canada.
Great. So back to the ID camps themselves, are there any limits on how many in each age group? At this time, no limit on how many in each age group. We'll accept any athlete that is nominated, which ties in great to the next question, which is, if a nominated player does not get an invitation, what does that mean? Are they not accepted? Nope, for this year, any athlete that is nominated by a coach will receive an invitation. If they didn't receive an invitation and they know that the coach nominated them, please reach out. It may have been, again, my emails tend to go to junk folders, so perhaps they didn't receive the email from me, but there's no athletes that are nominated by their club or other coach that won't then also be invited to the camp. Hope that answers that question. Can any player request to get nominated, or is it up to the coach to nominate the player? I can answer this one again. So this is handled, so a nomination request does not come through Field Hockey BC. An athlete that wants to attend the ID camps this summer, they will need to talk to their coach, ask them to nominate them. There might be another process within clubs. Some of the larger clubs may have already been figuring out a way to operate with this, but yeah, I hope that answers your question. And then the next question is, when do already nominated athletes get notified about identification camps if they're skipping some of the original ID camp stages? So I just want to address this. In the normal year, the typical cycle, where we would have had camps in March for provincial team selection, that in the Athlete Pathway Program Review Project, there was this idea of different camps, different entry points for different athletes. This year, we're only doing a single camp for athletes. So I have another question as well about athletes on the current targeted list. Those athletes will be sort of told separately, but basically there's no skipping of some of the original ID camp stages. And
I think,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, KJ, just one point on that. So what is unique about this year, as KJ said, these are just an evaluation camp. We're not going to be selecting teams and all that. So it's just purely evaluating the athletes. The other difference this year is the next gen athletes won't be participating in these camps. Unlike the normal provincial cycle, our third stage is when you make it through. That's when the next gen athletes join in, and we include the next gen athletes in our provincial team selection. But just for this purpose, for this year, the next gen athletes will not be participating. It'll just be everyone outside the next gen level.
Perfect. Okay, so a few more questions. Sorry, I hadn't scrolled down far enough. So is there a lower age cutoff for U16? John, do you want to answer this one?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I think we'll be aligning it with the entry level with the national championships. I think maybe the youngest one is 14. I'm not too sure, but that's something I'll have to follow up on. But typically we'll line it up with what the lowest level is that can be entered in at the national championships.
Okay, and then if there is a stellar U16 athlete, would they be considered for U18 if appropriate?
Well, again, this is where, yes, I think the question is, you mean for the elite program? And I guess this is the problem with the webinar, I can't ask questions back. Yeah, I think if there's an athlete that is exceedingly rare and steps up, if they're in the top percentage and they can handle that environment of playing with the older athletes, we would consider it. But they have to be that exceptional to be able to manage the standard of playing with older athletes.
Okay, so there are a few more. So will the coaches nomination forms and comments be considered beyond the initial invitation to the camps? And how will Field Hockey BC be able to assess players on their commitment and psychological elements through selection camps, for example?
Well, again, that might be an area that will be difficult, and we may not include that moving forward. But keep in mind, at the back end of it, when we give our report, having finished the provincial cycle, we'll have an idea of those provincial athletes on their commitment coming to provincial training, for example, what kind of provincial or what kind of potential do they have. So it's not just the beginning. This is to coordinate with Field Hockey Canada, again, through the whole provincial cycle. When we've done training completely and finished the competition, we can hand that information on to Field Hockey Canada.
Okay, just a few more. So I have a couple questions about the structure of the ID camps this year. So again, more information will come out next week, but they are going to be weekend training camps. Athletes won't be on the field from 9 to 5, but there will be a series of sessions that they will need to attend. But again, that's going to come out later. So the dates will be released next week. The exact format is dependent on how many athletes are in attendance. So sort of can't answer that fully at this time. And then, sorry. How many athletes do you anticipate to be nominated for U18 group, and what is the potential number? I'm not sure if that's a question about the ID camp or something else. So if it's a question more about the targeted athlete list, there is no set number at this point. It's really based on ability and skill level. John, anything else to add there?
No, that could vary from year to year. You might have 5 one year, and you might have a group of 20. Again, from the experience talking to other sports, that could vary. It depends on what the threshold is. We have a threshold, and it's how many makes it within that threshold. And
just a clarification that it was for the ID camp. So again, we don't know the number for U18 athletes. It's really dependent on how many people are nominated and register. Okay, so we're running fairly over time, so we're gonna hurry this up. If there are any questions that we didn't answer, we'll try to post them when we post the link to the webinar. Many of these have been answered earlier on in the webinar, so it might be worth going back and listening. And so there are BC athletes who have gone to university across the country. How will Field Hockey BC be incorporating these athletes into their ID plans?
Well, everyone's invited as long as they're nominated by a provincial coach. One of the things I just want to quickly share on the elite program too is that's one of the things that we wanted to work with their primary coach. So a university student, say if it's a BC athlete, they're maybe at the U of T, when they come back into our provincial cycle, we want to know from that primary coach, what are the things that they also need to work on in their development when they're training with the BC provincial team. Same thing for the UVic athletes when they finish the university, come into the provincial cycle. What can we work on with that coach? Same for UBC. So that's another example of the benefit of that. But yes, it's open for any BC athlete if they're nominated from a provincial coach or a coach, maybe even their university coach.
Okay, so we're going to cap it there. We've been talking for an hour and 15 minutes, and we really don't want this recording to be too long for anyone to really, take in. If anyone has any further questions that really haven't been answered, again, I encourage you to check in on our website. Everything should be posted by Monday. And then if you still have outstanding questions, then you can send them to us via email. Sorry, there is one last question that I will address right now. How are the nomination forms distributed? So there will be a link provided to the entire community. It's an online form, so people can expect to receive that next week. So I'm going to leave it there. Thank you so much for attending tonight. I really appreciate your time and your enthusiasm and your willingness to engage in this community. Other than that, have a great night.
Thank you, everybody.